What's up, everybody? Welcome in on Wednesday, middle of August. We've got preseason week 1 in the rearview mirror. We've got preseason week 2 and week 3 dead ahead of us, and the NFL regular season is going to be here in almost about 20 days. So not much time left. The summer is obviously flown past. It is now football season, even though the calendar says August. This is football season. We have Hard Knocks last night. We're going to dig into all of that. And we've got a very special guest to introduce to you momentarily. But before we do that, I want to get to the first order of business. And that is we are running a excellent promotion on our 2024 football preview or our draft kit. All you have to do is enter coupon code GETSHARP, and that will get you 50% off the book or 50% off the draft kit. The book is absolutely excellent. It's a resource, in fact, that I've been exchanging with our guest here for several years now in printed form. And we now are selling it in printed form as well up on Amazon.com. So you can go and check that out. But obviously, it is an excellent resource. We've talked about it a billion times over. It's over 550 pages. It's going to be the fastest way for you to get smart for the season. So a lot of people are tuning in, and their summer vacations are in the rearview mirror, and they're saying, how do I get ready for the football season? Well, this is the quickest way that it's going to get you prepared for the football season. And I also highly recommend Rich Rebar's draft kit. Use the coupon code GETSHARP, and you'll get 50% off either the book, which is up online at sharpfootballanalysis.com in PDF format. If you want the printed copy, it's up at Amazon, as well as the draft kit, which is up at sharpfootballanalysis.com. With that said, let's get to the order of business, which is to introduce our newest writer over at Sharp Football Analysis, Pam Maldonado, who I'm going to talk to you, Pam, I guess, about your journey here to the Sharp Football Analysis family. But why don't you give people a little bit of background on kind of how long you've been analyzing the NFL, because that's what you're going to be doing here for us this upcoming season, and kind of how you got your start and how long you've been analyzing it.
I'm so excited to be doing this podcast with you. It's kind of like a pinch me moment. So let's acknowledge that first of all. Yes, I am Pamela Maldonado. Hello to everybody, the ethers out there. I've been doing sports betting as a hobby for a very long time because I was in the poker world. And I ate poker, breathed poker, slept poker. And to get away from poker, I was doing sports betting. Born and raised in Texas, so I was very familiar with the Big 12. And it was just one of those things where I was good at it. And people were starting to be like, hey, she's pretty good. Built a little following up on Twitter back in the day. This is talking like 2013, 14, 15-ish. And I left the poker world in 2019, not knowing what I was going to do. And a sports betting company reached out to me and said, you are a free agent. Come join us. And it has been on the up and up ever since, working with Yahoo Sports. Now I'm with ESPN and with you as well. So it's just a very exciting trajectory of one of those like stories of your hobby can become your career. And I'm kind of proof of that. And so it's a puzzle piece. This is how people love Sudoku. People love chess. I love sports betting. It is a puzzle that you cannot solve, but I am here trying.
Yeah, and that's the one thing. Sports betting keeps you humble to a degree because you're never going to be hitting 100%, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to get feedback, instant results on a weekly basis, right? A lot of jobs that you work at, you're working on projects that are months long. You have your mid-season review, your year-end review, or something like that. You get the feedback, but with sports betting, you figure out whether you're right or wrong. And the key is to understand that small sample sizes don't necessarily tell the full story, and it's a process. You have to figure out your strategy, and you have to believe in it, and then you have to look at your longer term results over the span of years, in fact, to really feel confident about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And so that's why I've seen some of your work online for years now. You and I have been in contact for several years.
Uh-huh.
And it's going to be exciting. That's a great transition to share kind of what exactly are you going to be contributing for the listeners out there, because we had Ryan McChrystal. He's still on board with us. He's going to be focusing more on the college football side of things, on sharing some of his analysis, which he was doing last year as well. But he also was digging into NFL player props, and kind of you're taking over that. And what else are you going to be contributing over at Sharp Football Analysis that people can kind of understand, whether it's written or audio or video?
Warren, I think I was also one of your like OG like followers when you also were transitioning more into the NFL scene and you started coming out with a book. I still have your 2017 version. That was before I got into sports. I used to read your book as just like for fun. So to be, I was like, this is
I love
cool.
it.
I've always said that if I studied as much of studying your 600-page book as I did in college, that could have been a different story. But
Right.
before your website, I'm very excited because every Monday I'm going to be doing the power rankings, which is actually something that's brand new for me. I've never done before, and it's an interesting perspective because now I get like I intuitively know what rankings are, but now I'm putting it pen to paper and I can visualize 1 through 32 where each team is, how it's going to be adjusted week by week. So I'll be tracking that. I'm also going to be doing social videos with picks and analysis, giving spreads, totals, player props, which I love to do. That's something that I've been trying to craft my skill set over the last couple of years. And then I'm also going to be doing just deeper dives. We'll be doing a podcast. So it's going to be a little bit social video of like quick nuggets, and then the deeper dives doing the articles. So you can find some that week after week, every Monday, late into the week and then we have game day, right?
Yeah, game day is going to be a lot of fun as well. But certainly, we've got some of your content and analysis all throughout the week, whether it's written form, video form. So everybody's going to get very familiar with kind of the style of analysis that you do, and some of your picks and thoughts along the way as to different things that you like about teams and dislike about teams or coaches or strategies and things of that nature. So looking forward to seeing that over the course of the season. Let's dig in here to Hard Knocks. You know, the Chicago Bears are on Hard Knocks this year, and obviously it's pretty fun to see a team that just drafted the number 1 overall pick in quarterback Caleb Williams on Hard Knocks. But kind of, we've seen 2 episodes now. We're not going to dwell on this that much, but do you have any initial thoughts? Have you been watching it, first of all? And then secondly, do you have any initial thoughts on kind of what we're getting out of this season? Because it's always a topic of interest, is like, is Hard Knocks getting watered down? Is the content
Right.
anywhere close to being as good as it once was? I know the New York Giants off-season Hard Knocks, where it was mostly Joe Shane in the front office and how they're going about the draft process and free agency and their approaches there. That was a little bit more interesting, and they were showing a lot of behind the scenes and kind of the decisions that had to be made. What is your takeaway on what you've seen so far through 2 episodes of Hard Knocks for 2024 with the Chicago Bears?
Well, we can all look at the data, the analytics, and say why Caleb Williams, the number 1 overall pick, can do well, or maybe why he might struggle. But I'm very much a personal person. I like to hear the stories behind these players. And I think this second episode did a really good job of highlighting more of the personalities of the players. You saw wide receiver DJ Moore. His personality was really shining through when he got tackled during the preseason game and they had him mic'd and he's like, "Oh, I like football." He got really excited about it. It's just like a different angle that we're used to seeing. You saw Austin Booker. He was also highlighted because he had a really good preseason win. So there's just been a couple of storylines that I really liked following. And I also especially liked in yesterday's episode, they really showed the Chicago's cultural scene. And that's something that I want to relate to. Like, we know where they play in whatever dome they stay, whatever stadium field they have. But I want to see what is their life outside of football. They went to a blues bar featuring one of a local performance at Rosa's, and it was a really good blend of footage of these are the athletes during the day, and here's the athlete as a person at night. I appreciate that aspect, and I wish they did more of that.
So the one thing I don't disagree that is interesting, getting like the behind the scenes. I like all the behind the scenes that we can get. I don't want to see a guy at practice unless they're going to then talk about something behind the scenes. So it is interesting to follow some of the guys that are on the roster bubble, right? Like this, the storylines of their undrafted rookie quarterback who his performance in the first preseason Hall of Fame game got cut short due to weather, and then his parents are in the stands hoping that he gets it, and then the coach challenges the throw, and so it was a completion and it got called back. Those things are pretty interesting, but what I really want to see is what we didn't get a lot of it in this episode, which was a disappointment to me, but maybe in future episodes we will, is more of Caleb Williams, because he's kind of the engine that's going to make this Bears team go or stall. And I want to see his progress. The one thing I don't feel like we've really gotten a whole lot of is, we know Caleb Williams was an absolute stud at USC when he was in college.
Right.
How has that transition been to the NFL? What are the coaches saying that he needs to work a little bit more on? How proficient is he in practice? Like, I feel like they've cut all that away. Maybe the Bears don't want that to be displayed, and I guess I can understand why, but then that just waters down everything. Like, I don't just want to hear about how a running back who was set to, got his doctorate degree and might go to med school is going to do on the roster bubble. That's great to hear how he's doing. I want to hear how the quarterback is doing as well. Like, what is he picking up on? Where are the coaching points? Everything can't just be fine and dandy. If it is, let's hear a little bit more of that. So, and the other thing I'd like to hear of is the coaches inside some of their meetings talking about more of the players. He's on the bubble. This guy's struggling. We need more out of this guy. And just talking some about the strategy. So it's, I think
you
we
want
probably
more
have like
of the player development. You want more of seeing, you want to visualize Caleb Williams' confidence. You want to see the camaraderie that he's building with his wide receivers. You want to see him building that rapport, and so you can get an idea of how it's going to translate in week 5.
Yeah, exactly. I want to see how his development is. So not just week 5, but also week 1. Like, what is our angle? Is there anything to be gained here from a betting perspective?
Right.
And so I think it's interesting, to follow the players, and I want to see that too. And they're still like, probably 3 more episodes, maybe 4. I don't know exactly when it ends, but there's opportunities for them to do that. But we have seen the general content of Hard Knocks get watered down over the years. And I'm hoping that gets a little bit spicier the rest of this way. We'll see if that ends up happening. Speaking of spicy, Pam, the expose piece by ESPN, some great reporting came out last week about the Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts rift in the locker room last season. A lot of it was discussed the way kind of they talked about the article and built up to the storyline, was talking a little bit about, they lost their offensive coordinator. And so Brian Johnson came in, and Brian Johnson's had a history with Jalen Hurts, and kind of how that offense, they were looking to take it in a certain direction. And we saw a lot of arguments go on. Week 4, they were talking about. Week 6, they were talking about it in specific. After week 11 or 12, we were hearing some wide receivers talking about it, with Devonta Smith saying he's not happy about the way that he's getting production in this offense. And there was a lot of behind the scenes strife that was going on with the Philadelphia Eagles last season, that this sort of aired all that dirty laundry out there. It was a pretty fascinating read. I'm wondering what your thoughts were on any takeaways from that, in terms of something that you learned that you thought was new, something that like got you scratching your head, and then kind of what your thoughts are on how that will impact the season this year. Are you more hesitant about backing the Philadelphia Eagles because that the quarterback's still there and the head coach is still there, and there could be more of a rift even though they've replaced their offensive coordinator? Or do you feel like that move to replace the offensive coordinator is going to patch some things up potentially?
Right. So just in case anybody wasn't familiar, yes, ESPN did post a very detailed examination of the internal challenges that were faced by the Eagles. And as a viewer, we could see that maybe there wasn't cohesion on the field. But this article, what it did, it was really broke it down throughout the season of what was happening. And it started with the strain between Jalen Hurts and head coach Sirianni. You saw it you saw it pretty often in some of the Eagles' performances where they kind of took like a downturn. The team started 10-1, but then they faltered down the end. So then there is kind of back and forth of who's to blame. Is it the offensive struggles? Is it the lack of like pre-snap motion? Is there a lack of innovation? The communication issues were there during the season. We saw that there was an attempt to improve the communication with the team. Sirianni, you had your OC and Brian Johnson. They held meetings with Hurts, encouraging him to be more vocal. But with Hurts, that's not the type of player that you really get. He's a lot more reserved in nature, and because of that, he probably hadn't been the, I would say, like somebody like Josh Allen, who has like no fear of being vocal. I'm here. I'm going to motivate my team, and I just don't feel like you have that same type of personality from Hurts. So because of that, there's also play calling controversies, and it just really changed and affected the team dynamics. There's a lot that went wrong with the Eagles in 2023, and I'm sure that you can highlight some of those in detail because of your book, which is a gem, by the way, if nobody has purchased it. You can see all of the positives and the negatives from not just the Eagles, but from every team. But I think when it comes going forward, why the Eagles right now, their season win total is 10.5, and you have all of this internal struggle going on. That's not ensuing confidence, especially with this article, knowing the further details that we could visually see. It doesn't instill confidence in me wanting to back the Eagles in any form. Do they have the roster? Absolutely. Do they have the coaches? Yes. But at 10.5 wins, that is a high number for a lot of question marks. You still have offensive line changes. There's the potential for the defensive regression. Injury concerns are always an issue. It is a highly competitive division. So it's just a lot of, it's not smoke and mirrors. There's actually depth into this that could, in the long run, really affect the dynamics, not just from last year, carry over into the 2024 season, but also can have significant weight here into the next 2-3 years. And because of that, I would rather just wait and see rather than put any type of futures play on the Eagles.
Yeah, I thought the article it wasn't as surprising as I think some people thought that it was, because having studied the Eagles and written about it a lot in the 2024 football preview, which again, you can get the book for 50% off. Here's what it looks like in printed form. And you can get this up at Amazon. You can also get it for 50% off using the code GetSharp. Just go to sharp.football and you grab yourself a copy of that as soon as you possibly can, because you're going to want to study up this 550 plus pages. But I also analyzed the Philadelphia Eagles during the season and covered a lot of the issues that is easy to report on right now. But even before that, I'll tell you, one of the guys that I work with on the betting side of things behind the scenes, they don't write for our website, but I called him up probably after 3 quarters of the Eagles Patriots game in week 1. And I know it was raining, but I told him, we're going to be, at some point this season, we're going to be hard selling the Philadelphia Eagles. I am out on this offense coordinator. I'm out on his strategy. And I said that right away, week 1 of last season. And I know this team ended up going 10-1 to start the season. And in fact, they went 10-1 to start the 2022 season, where they made the Super Bowl. But they were massively different building up to that 10-1, which is why I'm always a firm believer of the anti-Bill Parcells quote, which is, you are what your record says you are. And I am the exact opposite. I want you to have a record that is very different than how you really play, because it gives us advantages from a betting perspective. And the Philadelphia Eagles were certainly one of those teams last season. If you look at just those through week 12, where they were 10-1, the year they went to the Super Bowl, they led at halftime in those games by an average of almost 8 points. And they only trailed at halftime in 2 of those games. Last year, they led at halftime in just 6 of those first 12 weeks of the season. And on average, they trailed at halftime by 1 point. They did not have any of the aggression out the gates like the 2022 Philadelphia Eagles did. There was very little urgency on offense. You could see it in terms of their pace of play. Jalen Hurts, like you said, Pam, is more of I don't want to say nonchalant or lackadaisical, but he's very calm, cool, and collected. And that personality comes through in his press conferences where he's thoughtful in his answers, and he takes his pauses and he takes his time, and he's very deliberate with how he speaks. But on the football field, right, you need to encourage a aggression level and a desire to get out the gates quickly. And because they were doing that in 2022 with Shane Steichen, they were building these leads, and then they could coast later. They could put in their backups in the second half and just really relax. But last year, they were scratching tooth and nail just to win some of these games late. And the way that the offense, beyond just like the pace and the style of it, they were throwing the ball very short, but holding on to the ball longer. And so their air yards per attempt were lower. Their time to throw was higher. And those two things should not happen at the same time, right? If you're going to take a little bit longer, you should pushing the ball down the field more. Case in point, look at all throws that Jalen Hurts had between 2.5 and 3.5 seconds last year. When he threw the ball between 2.5 and 3.5 seconds last year, he averaged just under 7.5 yards per pass attempt in terms of his target depth down the field, how far he was pushing it. In 2022, he was averaging 15 yards down the field. We're talking about double the depth of target when he held the ball for that long in 2022 as he did in 2023. It was just shorter, a lot of passes behind the line of scrimmage, a lot of time behind center. And so I'm excited about what we're going to get in 2023. I think it was fully justified that the head coach, while most fans, I'm not going to say we because I was noticing this, but because most fans just saw them winning these games, they're probably like, why was the coach getting mad in week 2 and week 3? Like, they're winning all these games. But I can understand why Nick Sirianni, who was a little bit more removed from the offense and letting the OC Brian Johnson and Jalen Hurts do more of what they wanted to do, how he was seeing a big difference in the way that the offense was producing on a play-to-play basis and kind of the things that they were doing out there, why he would be mad and why I am now more optimistic. He said he's going to remove himself a little bit further, to be determined if he actually does that. But now we've got Kellen Moore in the door, a brand new offensive coordinator. And I know he wasn't down in Dallas last season calling plays because Mike McCarthy more or less kicked him out. But Kellen Moore had this offense in Dallas playing at a pretty reasonable level. Dallas's offense has been fine for several years now. I'm excited to see what they bring to the table in Philadelphia. And I do feel like I wrote this in the book, but my final point on the Eagles is last year they lost both of their coordinators and they promoted from within. And they basically thought our roster is good. Let's just get guys who are from the staff to call plays and we'll just keep this thing going. Just next man up. We'll just, it's a team. We'll just keep it going. They found pretty quickly that you actually need really good coaches to have a lot of success in the NFL. And now they went from outside and brought those guys in.
Well, you're talking a lot about the offense, and I love offense in college football and I love defense in the NFL. So that's kind of where I tend to put my focus on. And it was the defense that was like the biggest eye test for me, which was, I mean, it was such a strength. You keep referring back to 2022, and that was like probably the strength of the Philadelphia Eagles back in the 2022 season. They had a historic sack rate, but that's very difficult to maintain your performance year after year. And we saw the struggles last year. They struggled to generate any pressure. There's a significant drop in sack production, and it wasn't just weaknesses in the sack percentage, but it was also weaknesses in the secondary. It was just further proof that injuries were also a problem, ineffective play from key defensive players. So that was the biggest transition that I saw from 2022 to 2023, Hurts aside, offense aside, and that's where I wanted to put my focus on. And did they make any improvements? That's the big question mark for the upcoming season. And yes, they did. Is it going to translate into success? That's the next story. But they brought in, Vic Fangio as the defensive coordinator. The team added CJ Gardner-Johnson. That could help with the previous issues, particularly in the pass defense. So I'm looking more so into that aspect of things. So I like that you and I have that balance of you're focused on the offense, I'm focused on the defense, and together, what does that mean? Is it still over or under 10.5 wins for the Eagles this season?
Yeah, and what I'm liking here is the Eagles in this division. I like the Eagles in this division. I think the Cowboys finish in second place, and that's one of the futures we
Mhm.
gave out already to subscribers who bought our futures package, which our futures package is up on the website as well. We've got a lot of futures in there, and we're going to be releasing some more today. And in fact, we're going to put out a few more today, and we're going to put out some more on Friday of this week. So make sure you're subscribed to the futures package. That's one that we got at a much better number than it currently sits. Eagles 1, Cowboys 2, division exacta 1-2 for the NFC East. Pam, along those lines, we were talking about the Eagles and what we think they'll do differently this upcoming season. What is one thing that you're hoping, whether it's a team or the league in whole, this upcoming season does differently and potentially in a better way this upcoming year? Like what's one of those things that you're looking for that would make either your life better financially because you bet on something to
Right.
happen, or just your eyes and your football Sundays, everything look a lot better to you because it's more efficient or more productive, or it's just more pleasing to the eye?
Well, we're betters, right? And the one thing, not even just betting aside, as a fan of, as a viewer of the NFL, what's like the number one thing that people complain about every week? Oh, that was a bad call. Oh, that the refs are screwing the game over again. So now there is a potential change for improvement because of the expanded replay review. So the NFL expanded the scope of replay reviews to include determining whether a quarterback was down, out of bounds before throwing a pass, or whether the play clock expired before the ball was snapped. Maybe this improves the accuracy of officiating. I'm not going to hold my breath, but at least the league is addressing the issue. And it's kind of like I bet a lot in tennis, and we have in tennis we have Hawkeye, and that's kind of eliminates the human error of things. Nope, do the replay. And just more often than not, it really helps, and it gives the correct answer as to whether the ball was in or out. The NFL needs to improve officiating, and so potentially this could be the start of that.
That's going to be fascinating. I think there are a lot of changes in store for us from an officiating perspective this year. You have the hip drop tackle, which,
Yep.
it's funny. There was such an outrage about this hip drop tackle when they were talking about should they actually pass this rule. And then everybody who complained, they're taking away our football from us. Oh my God, this is going to be the worst thing ever. There's been nothing because there hasn't been any, because that's the whole point of this penalty, why I was in favor of it, simply because it's killing some offensive players' careers. Like these
Right.
are
Yeah.
it was absolutely, to me, no different than the horse collar tackle. On occasion, there is a play where a defensive player will try to horse collar, just like there is a play on occasion where somebody will try to hip drop tackle. It is something that, if it is a rule against it, they're going to try to avoid doing it. It's not going to ruin football just because these are there. There's very high injury rates related to both these. So that rule is going to be on the books for this upcoming season. We'll see how often it actually gets called. Guarantee the first time it happens and gets flagged, those same people are going to be up in arms, but I don't think it's going to be a very frequent penalty. And then, of course, you've got the kickoff rule, which
Right.
remains to be seen how well that one translates. But to your point, the new review system is going to be hopefully beneficial. And the good news is for us over at Sharp Football Analysis, we have a excellent referee analyst, Joe Gibbs, not the former Washington Redskins head coach, but Joe Gibbs, who does a great job of analyzing every single tendency from all of the different officiating crews. And he'll be all over, which ones are using this system more than others, and potentially getting calls a little bit more accurate. So I'm going to be interested to hearing how that develops as the season goes on. One thing for me, Pam, that I was researching after I'd written the book, and I'm hoping that improves a little bit this year, but I'm not so sure that it will,
Mhm.
is with regards to the way that offenses are throwing the football based upon how defenses are playing right now. And
Okay.
defenses more and more are playing in that too high shell. They're sitting back. They're trying to prevent the deep over the top passes. They're trying to prevent quick scores. They want you to matriculate the ball down the field. And so what a lot of offensive coordinators have been doing since they A, saw this style of defense, and B, have realized that rushing isn't all that efficient as it once was, people are thinking that offensive coordinators specifically are thinking that these short, quick screen passes behind the line of scrimmage, that's a way to kind of a de facto run play. It's a way to get the ball to a player in space and have them work with it. And so this is a good way to replace the run game and increase some of these. And sure enough, that's what's been happening. Like in 2011 to 2016, the percentage of passes being thrown behind the line of scrimmage was 18%. Now we're up to 23%, which may not sound like a lot, but it's increasing every single season. And we're up to 23%. The problem is, it'd be one thing if those passes were getting more efficient or even staying as efficient. They're getting much, much worse in terms of their efficiency, to the point now that passes thrown at or behind the line of scrimmage are minus 0.23 EPA. To put that into perspective, if you look at the NFL as a whole, every single team, every single offense out there, when they throw the ball and target it behind the line of scrimmage, there is not a single offense that has positive EPA on those plays last season. Every team, even the very best team, the Chiefs, the 49ers, Super Bowl champions, Super Bowl participants, when they throw the ball behind the line of scrimmage, their EPA per attempt on those passes is negative. All but 3 teams have positive EPA per attempt when they throw the ball beyond the line of scrimmage. So even if you're a bad bottom 5, bottom 10 passing attack, you're most likely going to have positive EPA per attempt when you throw the ball just beyond the line of scrimmage. But when you pass it behind the line of scrimmage, these are not efficient plays. And offense coordinators need to reverse what they've been doing, turn the dial back the opposite direction, stop increasing the rate of passes that are being thrown behind the line of scrimmage, start reducing that. Understand the way the defense is playing you on that particular play. And if that play doesn't look good, like the way that the defense is covering it, audible, even a check to a run play, which, you know me, Pam, I much rather prefer teams to pass the ball. Right. But it's a situational basis. And if you need to run the ball in a particular situation because they're playing with a light box and they're encouraging you to throw the ball behind the line of scrimmage because they're just going to rally up to it, attack them up the gut with a run play, audible to something so that you can have more efficiency, or have your quarterback just simply scramble with the football, which is another play that's going to deliver positive EPA per play, as opposed to these passes behind the line of scrimmage. So that's one thing league-wide I hope changes and starts improving this upcoming season.
Well, you mentioned 2 teams, the San Francisco 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs, and I think they would be great examples of how to adapt your offensive effectiveness against some of these defenses just by utilizing like an increased use of motion. They really excel at that type of thing. It gains alignment advantage. You exploit defensive weaknesses, and what does it put an emphasis on? Yards after the catch. And what you're talking about, I love teams that pass. Well, these are 2 teams that are super pass heavy, have high success of it because they have great coaching schemes. So I think your hope is to see this across the league. It is very difficult because you have to have great coaching involved, and you have to have, if you can utilize like multi tight end sets, that would also increase an adaptation. But not every team has elite players or even depth at this point. Injuries become a concern, and depth on your roster becomes an issue. So there's a lot of factors that come into play here as to your hopes of seeing this across the league. I think you can definitely see these the adapting being made from some of the teams that are like within the top 10 headed into the season, or just like take samples from the Niners and the Chiefs.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads into another interesting topic I wanted to hit on real quick before we get into a couple of bets, and that is personnel usage by different teams. Mentioned teams that have multiple tight ends. As you're looking and watching preseason football, everybody out there, you're turning on the games on Friday night or Saturday afternoon, and you're watching all the different NFL teams kind of trot their backups out there quite frequently. And maybe you're only watching because you have a bet. Maybe you're not that big of a fan, but you're into fantasy football a little bit, or maybe you don't have a bet on it. So you're wondering kind of like, what am I going to learn from watching this game? Do I even care? Should I wait till the starters are going to play at the very beginning of the very next game and just tune this out for now? One of the things that you can take away from these preseason games is personnel usage by coaches. Most of them now, especially that they've changed the rules where games can't end in ties. A lot of them don't care about winning games. Some of them do, but many of them do not care if they win or lose these preseason games. What they care about is, of course, getting their players healthy. They don't want to get anybody injured. But first and foremost, they're using these to set their final roster. And the way that they're going to set their final roster is based upon, on the offensive side of the football at least, what type of personnel they're planning on deploying. And so they're not going to evaluate like multiple tight end sets, 2-3 tight end sets on the field in the preseason if they're the LA Rams. Right. Because they're going to be using a ton of 11 personnel. 3 wide receivers are almost going to use very little 2 to 3 tight end sets during the season. So they're not going to use that in the preseason either. And so a lot of these teams have changed. The new coach is there, new offensive coordinator is there, new play calling. They're going to potentially change up their personnel. And where that's going to help you and benefit you is from a fantasy football perspective. You know, you could be, and I'll give you a few names here of teams. You could be the Atlanta Falcons, and you're looking at, potentially, that third wide receiver from a fantasy football perspective and drafting them. Well, it will be music to your ears to know that last week in their preseason game, they used 88% 11 personnel in the first half. That was up from 15% the prior year. And I mentioned that this was in the book, in the 2024 football preview, which is 50% off using the code GetSharp over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. The fact that the Atlanta Falcons are probably going to have the largest year-over-year shift in offensive personnel deployment that we have seen in recent history. From Arthur Smith, who used very little 11 personnel, the lowest rate of any team in the NFL last year, to now what we're going to get with their new offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson, who comes from the Rams, and they are based in the preseason. They used 100% 11 personnel early downs in the first half in their preseason game this past weekend. So that's a team that's going to have a lot of 11 personnel. So there we are going to see that number 3 wide receiver used a lot more this upcoming season than we saw in years past. I'll give you 2 other quick teams that stood out to me.
Can I guess your 2 teams?
Yes.
Is the Titans one of them?
The Titans is one of them.
Perfect. You and I are simpatico here. I love that. This is, first of all, him and I had 0 discussions on this. This is me just guessing. So I'm glad I nailed one of them at least.
Yeah. And the other one that I'll mention, and there's a 4th one in the article. And as we go through the season, by the way, the article's up at sharpfootballanalysis.com. As we go through the preseason, after every single weekend, I'm going to be updating the personnel grouping percentages from a utilization perspective, and then adding more analysis for every single team. So keep clicking on that article after the games on Sundays. You will see the new updated personnel percentages there. But the third team that I wanted to discuss is pretty obvious, the Pittsburgh Steelers, because that's where Arthur Smith went to from Atlanta. And Pittsburgh had Matt Canada there calling plays. They dropped a ton from personnel usage of 3 wide receiver sets down to their base personnel, which they're using a lot more, number 2 tight end sets, as well as 2 running back sets. They had the 5th highest usage of 2 tight end sets in their week 1 preseason game, and the 5th highest usage of 2 running back sets. They had the second largest drop behind the Raiders in usage of 3 wide receiver sets. And so they were 69% in 2023. They dropped all the way down to 55% in their week 1 preseason game. So the Steelers don't have great wide receivers anyway. They don't have great depth there behind George Pickens. So this actually is going to fit them very well this upcoming season to get more tight ends out on the field and or running backs, and reduce the number of times that third wide receiver is out on the field. And then you mentioned, Pam, the Tennessee Titans. In 2023, the Titans used 11 personnel and only 52% of their early downs in the first half, the 6th least often of any team. But in their preseason game, with head coach Brian Callahan, who comes from Cincinnati, who uses a ton of 11 there with Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals. They used 11 personnel 75% of the time on early downs in the first half. That was the 6th highest rate of 11 personnel and the number 2 largest year-over-year increase. So the Titans, a lot more 11 personnel. The Atlanta Falcons, a lot more 11 personnel. So those number 3 wide receivers on those teams, they're going to get a lot more playing time. And now you have relative confirmation. You can feel very confident that, yes, those coaches were there. We probably surmised that they were going to be doing that. Here's proof for sure that they are going to do that because they were rolling it out at a high rate this preseason. And so focus on the number 3 wide receiver in when you're getting down to it as like maybe a way to break a tie from a fantasy football perspective when you're drafting. Those guys are going to be out on the field at a high rate, and usage and snaps is very important in fantasy football.
Right. And exactly. There's a few things that you said that caught my attention. And one, all of the coaching changes. So that's going to be offenses that are adapting by having this new coach and changing the strategy. There's the style of play of which they had. You mentioned the Titans, and that was my first guess because we're so used to seeing from the Titans a run-heavy approach because of King Henry. Well, now that he's out of the picture, in comes head coach Brian Callahan. Well, what is he going to want to do? He's going to want to emphasize the passing game, utilize more of that 1-1 personnel usage. There is a trend in the NFL that is adapting away from the run-heavy approach, more into the passing game. And if the teams, from a fantasy perspective, from a player prop perspective, if they don't have those wide receiver sets, well, then they're going to turn to the tight ends, just as you mentioned, like the Steelers, and they do have that tight end stretch of Pat Freiermuth. You have Mecole Pruitt and now Darnell Washington. Utilize those players in the passing game a lot more rather than just blockers, and that's where you get more of the personnel changes to, well, maybe now I want to utilize more of these players into my fantasy strategy, into my season long, week by week, or into a player prop. Some of these are going to be under the radar player props week after week because they're not the stars of the team because they're not with the wide receivers, but you can still maybe like find some value by getting a low hanging fruit number that could cash easily on one pass.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We love during the season when we're talking about player props and we're giving some of those out as part of our props package, which you can get at Sharp Football Analysis right now, as well as in the All Access package or the NFL Plus package, which has player props in it. Some of those longest reception, we definitely dabble betting unders or overs, depending on the situation, for longest reception as well as longest rush. I love those markets. They're very fun to attack in the props world. But speaking of props and player props, Pam, I wanted, before we let you go, get a couple of ideas from you for this upcoming season of bets you like. So let's first start with a player prop for the 2024 here in the futures market that you are attracted to.
I want to target a little bit more of the longer shot odds, stuff around maybe like the 10-1 mark. And one of them, which that I like, is Jared Goff to have the most passing yards. He's 10-1 right now. And it's because how many games do the Lions play indoors? So right off the bat, I know people want to look at him as far as like maybe like MVP. I'm kind of thinking, all right, his over passing yardage is really high and it's kind of heavily juiced. So they're expecting him to have a good season. How about he's the 5th favorite to have the most passing yards, 4th or 5th favorite, depending which book. But when he's playing indoors, his completion percentage is definitely evident. 67% of his passes indoor games, higher than his outdoor completion percentage of 62. In 2023, his passing yards and touchdowns, throwing for 3,200 yards, 23 touchdowns. And now you're getting a much easier schedule of passing defenses. So there's a really good opportunity here, who the Lions had a strong 10-2 record in the indoor games that Goff played, that his effectiveness in a controlled environment, his potential is like kind of through the roof, pun intended, that he can have a really solid season. So can his wide receiver in Amon-Ra St. Brown. I was looking at him to potentially have the most receiving yards, and you're getting longer odds because they're not the Chiefs, the Bills, or even the Niners. So you're getting them a little bit further down the board, possibly a little bit more value. If I like them for player props for season long, maybe taking some of these long shots on them to have the most, to have really solid seasons.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that long shot. I think I'm on board with the Detroit Lions on the futures market this upcoming season for a number of reasons. But the one thing that they're going to have to do, and that's interesting, is, they got to get out of this preseason. They've been a little bit banged up here, and Jahmyr Gibbs is injured right now. Now, on the positive, that could potentially mean a little bit more passing, right? Because they're not going to run David Montgomery into the ground early in the season, and they might find that they need to pass the ball around a little bit more. Number two, if Gibbs does return healthy, which we're all got our fingers crossed that he will, they have been working with Gibbs a lot more in the passing game. His passing last season was really interesting because his efficiency out of the backfield was terrible. Like his efficiency when he got the ball and ran it on the ground as a run play was great. But when he was working as a receiving back out of the backfield, those were very inefficient targets. And so they might be working a little bit more in that regard. Plus, you've got, Laporta, who has got another year under his belt. And I just think there is such a hack with these teams that are good and get to retain their coaching staff.
Yes.
And we see that in Kansas City year in, year out, especially on the defensive side of the ball, Pam, with Steve Spagnuolo. And it's like, why isn't he a head coach somewhere? Well, great for Patrick Mahomes, right? Great for the Kansas City Chiefs futures, because this guy knows how to game plan defense week to week based upon opponent's strengths and weaknesses. And he's one of the best week to week game planners defensively, in my opinion, in the entire NFL. And so no matter what type of defense and personnel the Kansas City Chiefs have, they've got a guy who's going to create a really good game plan to put his players at a position of strength against the opponent's offense. And then we know for the Detroit Lions, they were able to keep their offensive coordinator. He took interviews this past offseason. It was close, I think, with the Washington Commanders, decided to return home. That's a big edge for the Detroit Lions offense this upcoming season. So
I think it's a very underrated metric that you can't exactly measure, and I utilize it a lot also for looking at the preseason in college football. There's a difference between talent and veteran returning talent to the same team, and you see it. Like, everyone's talented in the NFL. You're in the NFL for a good reason, but there's a huge difference when you're returning to the same unit, same coaching staff, same wide receiver sets, same quarterback. There's cohesion. There's a trust already built. You're not having to stumble in the preseason into the first weeks trying to build that rapport. You already have that. So now it's an extension of the success that you had in the previous season, and now really utilize that to catapult yourself into further progression quicker than other teams have to face because of the changes that they have. So I think it's a really underrated metric that you can't exactly put a number to. But from the eye test, cohesion just really matters a lot when it comes to football teams.
I don't disagree. And cohesion along this next team, I'm going to throw out a player prop here before I get a team win total from you that you like. But with regard to the Atlanta Falcons, the cohesion of that offensive line, they have one of the better offensive lines in the NFL. Those guys are returning this year. But in place of Desmond Ridder is Kirk Cousins, who is returning from his Achilles tear. And what you're going to get, therefore, is a quarterback who's unlikely to run in a lot of touchdowns. And Desmond Ridder last year stole 5 rushing touchdowns from the Atlanta Falcons running backs by keeping the ball on some designed runs or tucking the ball in a couple designed passes. Kirk Cousins is not going to be running in a lot of touchdowns off of that Achilles ankle tear. And this team, though, is going to be getting down into the red zone more frequently this upcoming season with Kirk Cousins as their quarterback. So I think you're going to have more trips to the red zone, to the 10-yard line. And we know that most touchdowns are scored from inside the 10-yard line, not on these big plays. And so we're just going to have more opportunities, in my opinion, for Falcons running backs to get handoffs inside the 10-yard line with upside to score touchdowns. They also are playing the number one easiest schedule of run defenses this year. So you look at the offensive line, which is one of the better run blocking lines in the NFL, the number one easiest schedule of run defenses, a non-mobile quarterback, the potential upside opportunities. I think Bijan Robinson goes over 6.5 rushing touchdowns. Okay. Now, we gave that out as part of my NFL futures package up at Sharp Football Analysis, I don't know, a month ago maybe, and it was minus 108. Now it's 6.5 minus 128 is the best number. I see that at FanDuel. I see minus 130 at DraftKings, minus 130 at MGM, and that number has moved to 7.5 at Caesars. So do your shopping. That's one of the biggest, most important things that you can be doing when you're betting NFL futures, player props, team futures, etc. is lots of shopping, because lots of different books are hanging a bunch of numbers and you want to find the very best ones. In this case, it's going to be at FanDuel for minus 128 over 6.5. I still think that there is value there on Bijan Robinson's rushing touchdown. But now, Pam, let's pivot to a team future. What is one of your favorite team futures for the 2024 season?
First off, I want to just make a quick little note that you talking about Bijan Robinson having a great season. That is music to my ears as a Longhorn. I want to see him thrive, and he absolutely can because he has the supportive cast. He's such a dual threat quarterback, both in the passing game and down on the ground. So I'm very excited to see that come to fruition. I have high hopes. The team total that I like is an under, and it is the Chicago Bears under 8.5 wins. Or the bet that I like most is for the Chicago Bears to miss the playoffs because of that projection. And I don't know if you would be in agreement with me, but I mean, there's a lot riding here right now with Caleb Williams as the number one overall pick from the NFL draft. Number one, how quickly is he going to adjust to the NFL? Transitioning from as a rookie quarterback, there are growing pains. I don't care who you are, how great you are, there's going to be a transition period. You're still behind an offensive line that gave up 50 sacks last season. Was that more of Justin Fields, or was that actually the offensive line that was plagued by injuries? It had I talk about cohesion. Well, you can't have consistency and cohesion when you have only one offensive lineman on the field for all 17 games. There was a lack of depth in that offensive line. But even when they were healthy, the offensive line showed areas where they needed to have improvements. So I think because of that, I have a lot of hesitation to believe that Caleb Williams here, it's kind of really reminiscent to what we saw at USC. Lacking in the secondary, behind a terrible offensive line, coaching just really put a lot of weight on his shoulders to produce as a quarterback. And he had a lot of like YOLO balls trying to be like, okay, I got to make something work. I got to get it going. I got to get the offense going. Well, your offense can only do so much when your defense is lacking. And because I know Montez Sweat came into the mix and towards the end of the season, hey, he really performed and he did excellent things for this pass rush that they didn't have earlier. But you also played a really easy schedule of opposing quarterbacks. That is going to change this season when you now have to face veteran challenges, Matthew Stafford, Trevor Lawrence, Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, and you're playing your division games at the end of the season. I think there's just a lot more changes for this team that could they do well? Absolutely. Maybe in the 2025 season. For 2024, you have high profile matches against Brock Purdy, Geno Smith. It's just there's a lot of question marks for a lot of brand new. And I think there's a lot of hype around Williams because how great of a quarterback he is. But you're also probably expecting for him to have a CJ Stroud type of season, and CJ Stroud is an anomaly. That is something that is an exception to the rule. And could Caleb Williams do well? Absolutely. But 8.5 wins out of the gate with so many changes, with still an improving offensive line, with still question marks on the defense, Bears to miss the playoffs or the under 8.5 wins.
The Bears are such a fascinating team, and that play is extremely contrarian on your part, which is typically the right side that you want to be on. Everybody is in on the Bears, especially on Hard Knocks. I would imagine that the steam behind the Bears and their hype is going to continue as we ride through the rest of the preseason. They had a big win against the Buffalo Bills. They're a team that everybody is now wanting to see how this offense looks, wanting to watch Caleb Williams play. You go back and look last year at that defense, as you mentioned, the defensive side of the football. Here are the only quarterbacks that the Chicago Bears beat last year. And I know that there was a big difference between Justin Fields and what they're potentially getting in Caleb Williams.
Right.
They beat Bryce Young as a rookie. They beat Aiden O'Connell as a rookie. They beat Sam Howell as a first-year starter. Josh Dobbs, who is a backup. Taylor Heineke, who is a backup. Kyler Murray, who didn't have a full off season nor regular season because he came in midway through due to recovering and rehabbing from his injury, and Jared Goff, division opponent. Those are the only quarterbacks that they beat last season. They do have a more difficult schedule, as you alluded to. I showed them playing the number 23 toughest schedule of opposing passing attacks last year, which is the 10th easiest. Now they're going to play the 8th hardest schedule of opposing quarterbacks this upcoming season. So it definitely is going to be a step up for their defense. Now, it's a good landing spot for their quarterback because I show them playing some relatively easy pass defenses this year. They get to play the entire AFC South, which those pass defenses do not really scare you all that much. They get to play DC, though that defense might be a little bit different with Dan Quinn, but they still lacking for talent big time there. But they're running the running schedule for their running backs is more difficult. So they're not going to
Right.
have as much open space on the ground. A lot will potentially fall against more difficult quarterbacks that they're going to play
Exactly.
and more difficult run defenses that their own offense is going to deal with. That's a lot of pressure that's falling onto Caleb Williams in this passing attack to have some success. So that's going to be an interesting one worth tracking. And I'm fascinated to see from an entry point perspective how this line changes over the next 3 weeks before the regular season gets here, and some potential buy points to fade the Chicago Bears if one is interested in doing that.
Right.
Speaking of being interested in seeing more of your analysis, Pam, I know over the next couple of weeks, you're going to have multiple articles each week that are coming out highlighting some of your favorite player futures to bet, as well as some of your favorite team futures to bet. And those are all going to be up at sharpfootballanalysis.com. So if you guys are interested in seeing all of Pam's analysis this preseason, the rest of the way till the season begins, she's going to be delivering a lot more free futures from a player and a team perspective up at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Do not forget as well to check out the book that is up at sharpfootballanalysis.com, the 2024 football preview book. It is 50% off if you use the code GETSHARP. 50% off with the code GETSHARP. And if you want a printed book, like Pam has, just like I have right here, you can get this over at Amazon. So if you want the printed copy, it's over at Amazon. It is much cheaper to buy the printed copy than it is to buy the PDF and go and try to get that printed. That was an issue that Pam was running into years ago, which is why she kept reaching out, saying, can you get the printed copy to me? And it's definitely much cheaper if you're looking for a paper copy to just buy it off of Amazon, which we started to do a week ago, I think and we hadn't been doing it for like 4 years because we thought people aren't really going to want to pay this price, Pam. Like people, but the reality is people want the printed copy and they're willing to pay that price. So I'm happy for you guys out there who asked for it. We finally decided that we were going to go ahead and give it to you. So speaking of which, we're giving you a lot more Pam Maldonado at Sharp Football Analysis in 2024. Hope you guys are ready for that because we're excited to have her on board and see all her content up at sharpfootballanalysis.com this upcoming season. So for Pam and for myself, thank you guys for tuning in. A little preview of the upcoming season. We're going to be back with a lot more. Be ready on this channel. Set your alarms and alerts. We're going to be delivering a lot more podcasts between now and the start of the NFL season to get you ready in entirety for the upcoming season. We're excited about this one. I think we're going to have a really successful year this year and hoping that you can join us as well. From a fantasy perspective, grab that draft kit. It is also 50% off with Rich Rebar and Ray Summerlin's statistics and analysis up there. Just use the code GETSHARP. That will get you 50% off that. So for Pam and myself, thank you very much for joining us. We'll look forward to next time.